And it turns out I wasn't mentally unwell, I was just autistic.
Yes, it's a wheelchair. Wow, like, it's fine. Like,
so I think I just said, would you mind tearing it? The lady was like, why, do your hands not work? Well, actually...
I can plan anything between an inch of its life. This is where people think I'm OCD, because I'm like, no, I need to know this, and this before I even create the blueprint for the rest of it.
I hate the fact that the only way to fund my content is to speak negatively how I experience disability.
They're feeling rubbish. They're feeling rubbish. If they've got the attention span of a goldfish, they've got the attention span of a goldfish. Like, was that how it was meant to come out, or is it just the way it's come out, or have I said something wrong? I am the worst for that. Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Dana with us. Dana, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Dana. I kind of do lots of different things in the disability space, but the main one being kind of social media content creation about my disabled and neurodivergent experience.
I'm gonna love this conversation because, like me, Dana, I've known Dana for quite some time. We work in similar spaces, so this conversation is gonna be really good. First things first, I wanted to ask you, like, what? So you've got a bit of a. We were chatting just before we started. Got a bit of a collection of different neurodiversities and disabilities. Did you want to just quickly run us through what those are, how they affect you, how they present with yourself?
Yeah, so I'll do it in chronological order of receiving a diagnosis or a formal diagnosis. So the first is dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder, although that's not widely used anymore, but it is in medical fields, and that's what's on my GP report. And I was diagnosed with that shortly after having meningitis as a child.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I had to do a lot of work to get back to being able to walk, chew, eat, all those things. And a lot of people don't know that dyspraxia is actually an umbrella term to describe a cluster of symptoms, and it can be used in educational settings or in the neurodivergent sense, but it can also be used in medical settings to describe kind of the recovery phase of things like a stroke or things like meningitis. And it has a kind of a long-lasting impact on kind of your development and how you maneuver the world. The next is dyslexia, which is often a comorbidity of dyspraxia. So yeah, that's very much in the name, dyslexia. All through school struggled. I'm sure we'll get into that later on. And then later teens, early 20s, I was diagnosed as autistic. Which was a bit of a shock to me, but made sense given kind of my mental history background. It finally made all the pieces fit. And it turns out I wasn't, mentally unwell? I might have been mentally unwell as well, but I was just autistic and needed the right appropriations and support. Yeah. And then finally, around a year and a half ago now, I became unwell quite quickly and developed an autoimmune condition. I don't speak about the specific condition online, so I probably won't share what the name of the condition is. Yep. It's an autoimmune condition that kind of presents in terms of chronic pain, extreme fatigue, swelling, and some other kind of medical complications as a result of that.
Fair enough. It's quite a collection, and also you've been on quite a journey going from meningitis to also then adding on at the end just chronic pain for good measure. And I only say that in a comedic tone because it's just the way stuff happens in our world. It just you think you've sussed it all out, and then someone goes, "What about this? Have you thought about this before?"
Yeah,
it's just. So I wanted to dive into like. So obviously you've grown into, obviously, as I say, your situation's changed throughout time. And then you've also added on, as you mentioned, that you work in content creation and advocacy. What made you go, do you know what? All this stuff has happened. I want to help other people. Sod it. I'm going to put myself out there. How did that sort of come about?
Well, it was actually accidental, as most content creators' journeys will tell you. So I was studying for my master's degree in disability in the context of education, and it was during the COVID-19 pandemic, so I was working remotely, and my research focused on a lot of like autobiographical experiences mixed with kind of bringing the two worlds together between the community and literature. And I felt like there was a gap between kind of literature and lived experience of the community. And I was feeling quite frustrated. I think that is the feeling that I was getting. I was reading a lot about us, but not a lot with us involved, if that makes sense. Like we were very othering in this literature. So on a whim, I decided to bring out my acting degree because I was a professional actor for 2 years. Fun fact, I had to leave the industry due to inaccessibility. So, yeah, I made my first skit kind of thinking no one's going to relate to this. This is definitely a me problem. Turns out it wasn't a me problem. Turns out there's 24% of the population that is disabled. So, it just grew from there, really.
That's great. I mean, also you've added in like the performance background, and that's where mine started. It was okay. So I started wanting to be a fitness YouTuber, doing that wonderful thing. But then also the main reason I started content creating was because it's similar to yourself. I did really well in performing arts in school, and every teacher had me pegged to do really well. But I looked at the situation in the performance space and it was like, where do I fit? Because I'm basically always going to be the guy in the wheelchair. And there's only so many times you can reinvent the wheel on that one. And also it's kind of, I didn't want it to be like, oh, everyone I was doing was a sob story. And like, that was always my thing. So then that's why I leant towards content creation, because I was like, it kind of scratches that how to be a Muppet online itch that I have. Because as I say, most of the time people are like, oh, you do content creation. Like, what's that like? And I'm like, it's essentially me titting about online.
Definitely true.
But it's really interesting. Like, obviously, one thing I picked up on is obviously being a dyslexic person myself, you going, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a master's. And go back to uni, do all the paperwork, coursework that's involved in that. How was that journey? Because even myself, I think part of the reason I never really dived back into uni or never went to uni was because I was like, my brain just doesn't, sitting down and doing exams and doing written work wasn't where my skill set lied.
Well, the honest truth is, like, through school, through primary school and secondary school, I wanted to do well, but I didn't have the tools or the diagnosis or the support to do well. And then when I was, diagnosed through the university in my first year, I acquired a lot of skills, and I was really fortunate. I had a voice teacher who all the actors out there would be like, I know what that is, called Dr. Petronella Whitfield, who also did loads of books, PhD, like is a massive advocate for dyslexia in the arts. So she basically took me under her wing and was like, right, this is how you're going to access essays, performing arts. And basically there was a shift in mindset from the writing being a tool to the writing being a way to tell a story and bring my unique ideas. I actually got firsts all throughout my master's and came out of my undergraduate with a first. Wow. I was one of the highest in my class. So, in a nutshell, I basically went from, getting Fs in school to getting firsts because I had this support, and I was able to basically not focus so much on the output. Yeah, things are going to come out a bit clunky before I've put it through Grammarly and all those other bits and met with my tutor. But my ideas are solid. I think of things differently. I make connections that people don't see. So I focused on that. And I must say, I actually love academic writing. I know. People are going to hate me. They're going to be like, what a fake dyslexic influencer. But yeah, I will do my PhD at some point. So I think it just goes to show like the right support can go a really long way.
Yeah, I mean, what? So obviously you mentioned briefly there, Grammarly, a lot of us use it, particularly me included. But what other support mechanisms did you and your tutor put in place to sort of help with your dyslexia? Because something I've always found, like, it was only really once I left school, I found all these tools that I could use to make my life easier when it comes to writing. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's still a debate going on in my head of whether I'm basically really terrible at responding to people. And I put that down to the fact that my dyslexia goes, I can't be bothered to proofread everything. So I've said to my friends, am I ever going to turn into that guy that just uses Google Type and you get what you get and you figure out what it is from there? Or I'm just going to be the voice note guy and everything you get from me is a voice note.
I'm a voice note girly. All my friends, my line manager will tell you that I am a voice note girly through and through, because I just CBA sometimes. At least with the academic writing, like I put the energy into it because of what it is. But in terms of tools, Grammarly was obviously a massive one. And I think there's been a shift over the last couple of years where all this great technology has come out. And as soon as you know how to optimize it and use it in a way that is assistive, even if it wasn't intended to be, is a game changer. So one of my favourite things to do, so I'm actually in my spare time, I'm the jack of all trades here, I do tutoring to dyslexic students, so specifically dyslexic students at university level. And one of the things that I always encourage them to do, and no academics come for me here, this is not going to be the correct thing to say, is I think AI can be a great tool as long as you're not asking it to write your essay. The way that I use it and the way I encourage my students to use it is if you've got a paper that is really convoluted and someone's purposely made it obtuse so that people can't understand it, because that's what you'll find a lot in the academic space. You know, I think intelligence is being able to say something simply. If you're having to put loads of things in there, then you're actually trying to exclude a whole group of people. But one of my favourite things to do is to import documents or studies and things like that into ChatGPT and ask it to summarise key points or to rewrite it in dummy English. I'll say write it in a simple way. Yeah. And that helps you kind of map out the journey. So I think it's finding tools that work for you and for your course specific, like what you're studying.
Yeah.
And obviously online videos, this is going to sound so like whatever, but when I was doing my master's, I would often, I would read something and it would tell me about a certain theory, or like even things like as simple as like the social and medical model in the disability space. I would go, right, okay, I understand that. And then I'd go to YouTube and be like, the difference between medical and social model. Somebody would tell me through a cartoon, but then I would quote the paper.
I get that. Yeah, I get that. I mean, for me, like I always think for me as a learner, I'm a very audible learner. So forget writing stuff down, because the other thing as well is with CP, my handwriting, you might as well get a 4-year-old to write it. You ain't going to be able to read it. Like it's not going to be legible. So I'm a very much audible learner. So then for me, that's where AI has come in of like, read this to me, because I will absorb it so much more. And I completely agree. The support that AI can provide, like the amount of times I'm like, I'd go to Copilot, can you proofread this email for me? Yeah. Because I'm just like, the amount of times you end up using read out loud systems and it's just like slow. Whereas with AI, you can just go, do that while I do this.
I also do that a lot with my autism. So sometimes I can come across quite blunt, particularly in written communication. So I will often import it and say, make friendly, but not too friendly.
I like that though. I like that because I've worked with quite a few people that, I mean, I overanalyze. I'm very much an overanalyzed person in terms of the way things come across. Whenever I write an email, there's been a 3-minute conversation with myself of like, does this come across okay? So but I've worked with plenty of people where it's just the way they work. So I oftentimes would get emails from them like, Charlie, can you Charlify this for me? And I'm like, yeah, sure.
Make it nice, make it not so people aren't going to be cross at me.
Yeah, definitely. But so AI is a massive one, Grammarly's a massive one. Is there anything else that you use to support you with your dyslexia?
Yeah, I was really fortunate when I first started on my kind of content creation journey, and it was the first brand that ever actually sponsored me, and they've kept that sponsorship up until recently, which is Orcam, which I actually use all the time.
I've not actually heard of it, to be fair.
It's downstairs, but it's like a device, and basically you can scan things, you can have earphones, and it will read it to you, and you can change the speed. I find it really helpful in things like bus stops, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I
things
love that.
That aren't tech related, but I need to read in person, and it scans it and it reads it in my ears. So it's great.
This is where I think. Have you seen the Meta glasses? that have come
Yes.
out. I
Yeah.
think they're going to be absolutely game changing once they get it right. Once they get it right, I think it's going to be game changing for anyone that's got visual impairment, anyone that's dyslexic, or just, I think, as I say, people don't realize how much like people's brains absorb information in different ways. So you have to present it in different ways for it to make sense. I think it's going to be such a big change. I wanted to come on to your autism and how that coexists. I can't remember the proper terminology there. Coexists with your dyslexia and everything else. So how does your autism present?
So for me, like obviously growing up, a lot of popular cultural media will tell you that first of all it's male identifying or boys that are autistic and that they like trains, or the typical Sheldon Cooper or something like that. So I never necessarily resonated with any kind of traits that were on the TV or through media. So I had absolutely no idea that I was autistic. And for me, I'm overly emotional, which is something that is starting to get spoken about a bit more in the autism space. But for so long, people have been like, well, autistic people don't have empathy, which is not true. No. Which is not true. But just, might present or experience it in a different way. And if you're clued in to me and my personality, you'll be able to pick up on it. So for me, the way it presents, and I want to say the main barrier to like the world around me is that over emotion, which I think also stems from being dyslexic. And we know there's a documented level of lack of confidence and self-esteem within dyslexia. So what happens is I end up not just over analyzing, but over analyzing absolutely everything from body language to the way someone said something to the timing they said it. And for me, my autism is very masked. So when I'm in like conversations and things, I will be going counts of eight for eye contact, look away, counts of eight, look, and it is exhausting. So I'd say, I mean, obviously there's lots of ways it presents, but that is one of the main ways. And that actually feeds into the fact that I have got OCD as well, which is a very common comorbidity of autism, but not in the way people think it is. My OCD is not, oh, let me just move that, and I'm a clean freak. That's not what it is. It's over analysing or thinking I said something rude or inappropriate. So yeah, that's kind of the way it presents. The bit
that's interesting for me is I relate to so much of that. I am the worst for looking at someone going, was that how it was meant to come out, or is it just the way it's come out, or have I said something wrong? I am the worst for that, so I can relate to a lot of it. And I think as well, because I wanted to touch on this, because I saw your post about your experience at Taylor Swift and how it's one of your specialist subjects, and how that then impacted you emotionally. And I thought it was really powerful how you showed that online. And I think as well, like, I think more people just need to be more. It's hard because there's so many trolls out there, but I think there's power in vulnerability, because then people can go, it's not only me. Because I think that's always been my worry, is like, if someone does something and think, oh, it's just my weird little quirk. Actually, no, there's probably something out there who can support you with it, or just people that can relate to it. So then when you're like, does it feel like this? You can go to someone and go, yeah, it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was actually it's funny you picked up on that video, because that was actually my first experience of being vulnerable. Anybody that knows my content knows that it's always after the fact. It's always quite put together. So, and I will also rejig the way that I present it to A, be engaging, and B, to say the things I wish I'd said in the moment. Because a lot of the times, you'll know this, someone will say something ableist or something weird, and you'll just be like a deer in the headlights. Yeah. So I've always used TikTok as being like a space to be like, actually, I want to say this, and that was my first experience of actually sharing online, like more me as a person rather than the characters that I create to tell stories. And I was so I can't even, like, I've been on social for like 3 years now. So like, I don't get much anxiety posting about myself. Things have gone viral. It's happened. But that video, I was like in a mess. I was like checking it every 30 seconds to check the comments. And I knew that if somebody said anything about that video, I was going to break. And I did. I don't know if you saw a follow-up video where someone had left a comment, and I was like, it was like full unmasked, like feeling like an alien in the world. And yeah, but I did see that so many people, particularly autistic Taylor Swift fans, were like, this was me. I like exactly that. This is how I experienced it. And also then non-autistic people were going, wow, like I can really see the impact of like this moment on you and how you're kind of regulating it in your body.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really proud of myself for sharing it and keeping it up, because I've had so many like pull it down, and I haven't.
100%. I definitely think it was something that needed to be shown. And I think as well, I mean, you know, I've known you for quite some time. It's like you're quite well known in the community, and it's nice to have someone with that sort of standing come out and go, this is something I experience. Am I the only one?
Yeah.
Was really so, like, hats off to you. I don't want to make you feel awkward, but I definitely think it was the right thing to do. One thing I do want to touch on, just out of my pure curiosity, is the Taylor Swift outfits. We need to touch on this. So you pretty much recreated most of the outfits, is that right?
Yeah, so I've been making recreations in private for years, and this is one of the maskings of my special interest that people don't know. So yeah, I've been recreating her outfits for many years. Not even my close, not necessarily all my close friends and family even know it. It's something that with the Eras tour, because it was all consuming and it became socially acceptable to like Taylor Swift. 3 years ago, I was being ripped to shreds, and I had to really try to mask it, even though it would come out. So yeah, I absolutely love remaking Taylor Swift outfits. I mean, if anyone that follows me on Instagram, mainly my stories, you will see there's been many a recreation.
Yep. I mean, I didn't realise it till obviously you did the recent tour, and then me and Gina were chatting about it, and I was like, can't believe how like all in she is. She's like, right, we're doing this.
I mean, the thing is as well about the Taylor Swift, the Swiftie community, obviously she's blown up massively, but even before that, like, it is genuinely a very supportive community, and everyone, autistic or not, is quite on that level. Like, it's quite normal to have a bit of a shrine to her somewhere in your house. And
have you sort of, from doing that, have you sort of picked up and gone, actually, I've got some skills here that I didn't know I had? Because I'm sitting there like, half of the stuff you were doing, I was sitting there like, I wouldn't even know where to flipping start. And you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna make it.
You know what? The skills didn't surprise me, because I've been that way inclined for pretty much my whole life. I've always been the way I've always described my autism, and I'm saying this very much as me experience. I'm not projecting that onto other people. That's one thing I have to be very clear about. The content that I make, it's me and the way I experience the world, is that I've always kind of done the things that are extra or other, or, you know, if someone says something's not possible, I'm a bit like, well, you know, I'll do it. The outfits for me were actually more aligned with what I've been doing for years anyway. I just started showing it because all of a sudden, like I said, there's been quite a phenomenon around Taylor Swift in the last year where it's become really socially acceptable to be a fan of hers. I mean, all I'm saying is you didn't want to be around during the rep era. You did not want to be around when they were calling her a snake and things like that. Yeah.
I always forget how long Taylor Swift's been around for. I always forget. I mean, I'm by no stretch of the hands up. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a super fan. I know her songs, and that's probably about the strength of my knowledge. But I wanted to come on to something that you briefly touched on there, of like having to, obviously working in the content creator space and working in the disability space. It's very hard because different parts of the community have different opinions. So then you do feel like you have to prerequisite a lot of what you say before you say it, so then it doesn't create problems in the other part of the community that doesn't align with that. I always struggle to try and map out my thought with this. But like, what I was going to say to you is, what's your opinion on the position that the disabled community is in, obviously particularly speaking from the spaces that you work in, with getting too caught up in language and over explaining things? Because it's something I've brought up quite a few times of, I mean, I always use the same example and people are probably sick of hearing it, but like, I always think should we not focus on the bigger problems of like fixing, accessing stuff, whether that be you being able to access information, or from a wheelchair user's perspective, trains, job, and then a big one for the whole community is jobs. That's a huge one, which we'll come on to later. What's your opinion on it? Because see, you touched on it there, that you had to give the prerequisite of like, this is my experience, when it should, my opinion is it should always, that shouldn't even be something you have to explain. You can only speak from your experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on what we're talking about, doesn't it? Like, I think there's a balance to be had between, because obviously we definitely don't want to be using slurs, for example, or you know, obviously the preference in the UK, at least, obviously it depends culturally, but it's disabled person rather than person with disabilities. But I do think, particularly in the content creation, there is a gatekeeping of knowledge and allowing people to share how they experience their own disability. And I actually had a really eye-opening experience with someone that I met at an event a couple of years ago, because I kind of started to do that, like, in, you know, really reflecting on myself there. And it was around kind of autistic person and Asperger's syndrome, which we know is outdated and not correct. And this person said to me, you know, being in the social space, so a little bit of background. This person was diagnosed when they were very young, and they were male identifying, and they said, you know, I do experience my autism like Sheldon Cooper. I do. Like, I am the stereotypical version of autism. And I was like, oh, right, okay. And he was like, and I grew up with the language of Asperger's. So even though I've adapted and changed, he was saying to me, like, it's really important that when you're speaking to someone, if they're talking about their own experience, obviously you can guide them and say, you know, perhaps maybe you should look up this language, but not to alienate people who will use it themselves. Obviously, we know the background of that word, and it absolutely is not the right word to be using. But I think there does need to be a little bit of grace for people that might need to transition. And that's a great example of like, oh, okay, you know, because they were basically saying, on the social space, I now don't see myself reflected, which again is quite interesting. And I thought, right, okay, you know, we just got to be. I mean, if I was to put in a nutshell what I'm saying, I'm blabbing, but in a nutshell, I think activists and social creators, or people working in the space, need to give people the space, particularly the people. I'm speaking particularly about autism here, because it's a great one to kind of like get your teeth into around like language and stuff. But, you know, you're asking someone who perhaps might struggle with change, or, you know, struggle with how they appear or how they communicate that's not rude, because I'm often taken as rude, and then taking it as rude. And I think there just needs to be a slight grace within the community to do that transition and make sure everyone's part of the journey. So yeah, I mean, I obviously worked at Purple Goat, and one of the great things that I learned there was we don't judge. Whatever part of the journey you're on, they will take you through the steps of getting it right. Don't just jump straight to, well, you're a bad person and, you know, you should be doing better. You want to be going, okay, that's where you're at. Let's make these steps and make it authentic and guide you through the process. And I think that can be the same within the community as well, when it's community on community sharing.
100%. And I think it always comes out to the point that I always make of like, I think we've got this culture, and this is even just wider in terms of just general population, of not allowing people to make mistakes. It's almost like as soon as you make a mistake, you're the worst person ever. And it's like, actually, like the amount of times I've met people and they've used the wrong terminology, or they've used the term that I'm like, ooh, but I'm not going to be like, oh, you're a terrible person for that, because you used the language that you knew. And whether that's the wrong or right language, that's the language. And now I will explain to you why that might be a problem. Not in a way of like to make you feel, because the other thing as well is it's a fine line, because you don't want to make the individual feel awkward while they've made a mistake. That if it's a genuine mistake, it's a genuine mistake. You don't want to be sitting there the whole night going, especially with people like us two, you do something like that, we'll be sitting there going, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. Why did I do that? What?
And you can always tell someone's intention, right? Like if someone slips and says something, but they mean it in the right way, you can obviously guide them in a way that is welcoming, not, well, you should know this.
Yeah.
And I think also around language, it's very socialized, as in social medialized. If someone's not very active on social, they might not necessarily know. You know, I've learned so much from, you know, other disabled creators about how they experience their disability, the right language for their community and things like that. So, you know, it's an ever learning process. And I do think it's important not to kind of gatekeep that knowledge and make sure that it is accessible and that it's a journey for people. I will say though, in terms of my content creation, one of the barriers that I face, barriers, I don't know if it's a barrier or more so my content pisses people off, right? That's the way it goes viral. Like that, the videos that do well is because it gets under somebody's skin. Most of the community agree, and the non-disabled people are like, well, and then they'll say something completely obtuse. And I find people will purposely misunderstand my content to paint me, the disabled person, as the issue in the situation. So like, for example, I did a video about my recent experience in like a cafe where I'd gone a few times and I'd said to them, oh, you know, the little like sachets for like sauce, like ketchup and stuff. I'd said, would you mind just like tearing it open and popping it on the plate? Just, you know, if that's okay, because I've got, I don't think I even said that first. I think I just said, would you mind tearing it? Yeah. And they said, the lady was like, why, do your hands not work? And I said, well, actually, I was like, I actually have a disability, like an autoimmune, and I explained the condition to her, which I hate doing, and then she was like, oh, I'm really sorry. And I posted that online to be like, you know, basically be like, if she'd led with compassion, that shouldn't have been an issue. Lots of accessibility is basic compassion or just thinking beyond yourself. And so many people in the comments were like, well, what if she had a hidden disability?
Yeah, but
and I was like,
yeah. I mean, for me, I come back to, because I think the whole thing, and this is a really recent realization, but I haven't yet been able to prove it wrong. Every problem starts with poor communication. Every problem. And it's like, if we could just fix that, and like you say, you approach the conversation of like, yeah, I can. May I ask why or how it helps you? Then you open the door for the conversation. But it's just... But it was just so weird, because I think I even said, would you mind using a pair of scissors? And like I said, so many people in the comments were trying to purposely make me out to be the bad guy. And I thought, well, in that particular situation, what we're looking at is me, a disabled person, trying to access a public space. Yeah. And if she had said, oh, well, actually, I've got bad hands myself, let me go and get my manager. The issue was the fact she was like, do your hands not work? And it was quite like, you know, you're rude. Yeah, abrupt and sarcastic. And I think, if you lead with that, with someone that you don't, as a very sarcastic person myself, don't lead with that unless you're using it as like, because I use it as an icebreaker, because people go, ooh, how do I deal with the guy in the wheelchair? And I'm like, yes, it's a wheelchair. Wow, like, you know, it's fine. Like, And I think I was going to say the other thing as well, and you brought it up there, is I think one of the big problems I've always struggled with social media is essentially unless it's like you say, unless there's a negative thing that happens, whether it be trolls in the comments, whether it be a negative experience of a disabled individual, if it's a positive experience, it doesn't work. But then that works for the whole of like news and the whole of the media sector of it has to be, oh my God, this thing happened for anything to happen to it. Like I always relate it to, there's a lot happening in the aviation space for disabled people. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen. Look at every piece of content that ever goes viral. It's always about a negative experience. But yeah, I post. I mean, I'm not making this personal because I'm not bothered about it. I'm more using it as an example. So I post I had a perfectly good experience using flying, and it goes nowhere. And you're like, So that's the other thing as well, is I think too much, and this is just a wider problem, not just in social media, like we focus so much on the negative. Like, why don't we focus on the positive? Well, yeah, I mean, aviation is a very interesting one, because obviously there is massive barriers around 100%. Aviation. I'm sure you know. But yeah, I've made a few videos that have been, if someone's caught me off guard and been really compassionate or
really understanding. Like I once I met a new friend, and the first time I think we hung out, I like mentioned my disability, and then the next time I saw them, they said, "Oh, like by the way, like I researched that," and then they did something like instinctively,
wow.
and they were like, "Oh, let me just get that for you."
Yeah.
Am I okay with that? And I made a video about that, and that did really well. So I think there is a space for it, but I think it's just because obviously naturally, and I think we could probably move on to this later when we talk about chronic pain. I've had a massive shift in terms of my access needs over the last year, going from someone that's not a mobility aid user to someone that relies on a walking stick full time. There's been a whole new level of barriers that I couldn't even believe existed before, that perhaps didn't. And I've just lost my thought.
It's all right. It happens to me. Don't worry.
What was it? We were talking about the negative.
Yeah.
I think it's because as disabled people, we are let down a lot.
Yes.
So, for us, social media has become a way of actually highlighting those experiences that before went very hidden.
Yeah.
That's one thing I absolutely love about social media, regardless of what anyone says. I love the fact that disabled people from all communities within the community are able to share their lived experience from the comfort of their own home. It's an accessible way of communicating to the wider world how we experience life.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think it brings me on to quite nicely to one thing that I wanted to ask you. I know them because I've worked with them and I've spoken to Jane, but you've recently joined over at EvenBrake. And for anyone that doesn't know EvenBrake, before I go into my questions, because it does link into what we were just chatting about, what is EvenBrake? What are they about and what do they do?
Okay, so Evenbreak is a disabled job board run by and for disabled people. And, your initial thought is, well, is it just going to be in my local Tesco? The answer to that is there is those roles, but it's across industry sector. You could probably search anything from accountancy to marketing, and there will be roles in there. And the whole idea is supporting on both sides, supporting disabled candidates that want and can work into the work that they want, whilst also simultaneously supporting employers to be inclusive and honestly have the confidence to take inclusion on. Because I think a lot of companies are like, I'm scared, I don't want to say the wrong thing, I don't want to do the wrong thing, and we basically guide them on kind of both sides. So that's in a nutshell. Obviously it was created by Jane, who acquired her disability later on in life. And it was made from literally her bed, like with a laptop above her head, because all of a sudden she was disabled and she was like, I can't believe this is what the work experience is like. Why isn't there a job board? And lo and behold, that's 10 years later, that's where we are.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, I've only had a couple of meetings with Jane, but she's one of the nicest people I've met. But the one thing I did want to ask, because you touched on it there about content creation and being in the comfort of your own home. Obviously, you're now very much in the job recruitment space. One thing that's been bugging me recently is loads of organisations from obviously. At COVID, it was all of a sudden working from home was cool. It was trendy. Everyone was doing it. But I remember when I left school, I remember being turned down from jobs asking to work from home. And they were like, you're too young. We can't trust you. We're not going to let you work from home. Then we fast forward to now where we've now proven that working from home works. And it works for the majority of jobs that are office based. But what's bugging me at the moment is there seems to be a thing where it's like, now we want to shift and get everyone back in the office. Now, while I understand the whole argument of builds morale, gets everyone creative thinking, working together, 100% behind that. But we're moving away from it being a choice because it's very much like companies are going with, no, the 2 days in the office now are mandatory. The 3 other days you can do what you like, but the 2 in the office, you got to come in. And I really struggle with it because I'm like, you'll go to a company, but I'm say use me example, I'm a wheelchair user. They're like, oh well, like you still the office is accessible. You should come in. And it's like there's a lot more to it than just
yeah. My space helped for me as a disabled person. Yeah, I mean, I am going to say something slightly controversial with the increases productivity, creativity, blah blah blah. I think that's bullshit. Utter bullshit.
Yeah.
I've worked at Purple Goat Agency, I've worked at Evenbreak, and I can tell you we've had some of the most phenomenal ideas. Purple Goat is actually a great example. Look at the campaigns they create from remotely. Like, I'm sorry, no, as long as you've got the right processes in place, the right management, there is no reason why working from home can't work. And I think COVID did see a shift. Disabled people have been asking for years to make this a part of our culture.
Yep.
And it does infuriate me slightly that now that COVID has, obviously the lockdowns have finished, COVID is obviously still around, they are looking to transition back on nothing more than trust issues.
Yeah, completely with
when
you.
we know statistically that there is no difference in productivity. We've done lots of studies about working from home and creativity, and actually, 2 employers I've had now that are very relaxed in their approach to me, how I manage my time, my hours, and I have never not delivered a piece of work when I intended to, or there's never been any issues.
Yep.
So, yeah.
It's all about, like, I think as well, it's moving. The thing is, there's always going to be people that ruin a system. So, like, let's say, for example, a company goes, right, everyone can work from home. It's all good. Everyone's got flexible hours. There's always going to be one Joe that goes, do you know what? Because we get to work from home, I'm just going to wobble my mouse for 7 hours a day. There's always going to be one. I feel
like that should be like an individual, like that. I feel like that. I mean, obviously, speaking from my experience of working in 2 remote organizations, I feel like if that was the thing, then that would be a similar process to someone not working in the office.
Yep. 100%. I completely agree. But then it's that whole thing of one person fucks up and ruins the whole thing for everyone else. And I hate that culture, because it's like, that's not the one person. The one person should be picked up and that should be talked about and fixed. But if everyone else is working fine, why do we all have to? It's a really weird one. And I think what I don't like is, like, there's no accountability really with the Disability Equalities Act of 2010 and accessing employment and blah, 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 the usual stuff. Yeah. Because you speak to the able-bodied community, the wider community, sorry to use the wrong term there. But you speak to the wider community who aren't well versed in the disability space, and they go, "Oh, but there's this act that does this," and you're like, "Yeah, but find me an employer that listens to it."
Yeah, I mean, I find the Equalities Act to be quite interesting, and I've had a lot of anxiety in the recent weeks because of a lot of the parties that stood to gain power were looking to abolish the Equalities Act, which it doesn't do much, but it does provide some kind of standing and legal fallback. But I think you're right. I think it is too vague. And I think the issue there is a lot of decisions made in Parliament don't have disabled people involved in the conversation. So therefore, they don't understand the nuance of conditions. The fact that, yes, there are some roles that couldn't be performed at home. For example, if you were like a Tesco cashier, you would have to go in. But, a lot of these days, a lot of jobs are done through our computers. I think it's because there is a lack of nuance. I mean, in an ideal world where I could make all the changes and I'm Parliament, I would, have a board of disabled people from a wide range of communities to input in how things like that are built and how structures like that are built. But I don't think that'll ever happen. But yeah, I totally agree.
I mean, me and Dana have worked in these spaces for a long time, and the big conversation is, why aren't more disabled people consulted for everything? Because we're impacted. We're part of the wider community. And as I always say to people, particularly from physical disability side of things, you're more likely to end up like me than I am like you. So this is why you need to listen to me.
This is what I always go back to, the fact that 80% of disabilities are acquired. So you might think that disabled people are other, or not your problem. I'll use, that's the things that people have said in my comment section. It's like, what do you think happens with age?
Yeah. Yep.
All of a sudden you're going to need the priority seat on the bus. You're going to need the bus driver to not set off before you've sat down with your walking stick.
Yep.
And I think it's really important to think beyond yourself. Accessibility benefits everyone. I mean, we're in Disability Pride Month at the moment, and look at all the inventions that were originally created to either support a disabled person or from a disabled person themselves. Go back to the fact we are the largest minority. We're not. It's a conversation that everybody should be having, because if you're not disabled yourself, someone that is, and that's a stat. So
Yeah, 100%. And it's just bringing us into the conversation. Like, the thing, I think, because people make decisions for us, that's where I was linking back to, like, you look at products that are designed for disabled people by non-disabled people, then they're not fit for purpose, or they look really clinical. That's the other thing you see a lot of. They look really clinical. They look like something straight out of a hospital,
Which is ironic. A lot of us have medical trauma, so it's like a funny little joke they're trying to pull.
It's like the whole, remember this?
Yeah.
And you're like hyperventilating in the corner.
Yeah, literally.
I just wanted to come back to EvenBrake a bit more. We brought the conversation to, like, working from home and the changes that are happening, trying to shift people back to being in the office. How do I don't know whether this is something you can answer from your role at EvenBrake, but how does EvenBrake sort of broach that topic of reasonable accommodations and things that really simple changes that can be used to help an individual?
So I sit in the marketing side, so more so bringing in the community, but I know from the person that runs kind of training and innovation, you know, what you see is probably just a tiny little snapshot of what EvenBrake actually does, because you have things like career coaching, and we do training with companies to upskill and educate them around disability and adjustments. And Jane, our CEO, is a massive advocate for being CV-less in the future, which I am fully behind. So getting rid of the conventional CV.
How would that look? I've not heard of that before. So how would that look?
Well, I can tell you, because the employment process for EvenBrake is exactly practice what they preach. So it focuses more on the unique experiences that you bring from your lived experience. So obviously, as a disabled person, this is a great example, especially since needing my walking stick. When I have to make a journey, I am having to plan like it's the Paralympic Games.
Yep.
Like the logistics around booking assistance, then when you're there and assistants leaving you on the train, like it's a whole thing. And I've become so accustomed to basically running my disability like business logistics.
Yep.
You know, and that's a skill, for example, that if you were to be able to highlight and say, well, X, Y, and Z, it makes me be able to, you know, execute logistics. I'm not saying everything comes back to your disability.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it's the added skills. And then obviously in terms of CV, one thing that Jane is kind of massively passionate on is it doesn't allow for the CV is obviously like the highlights, and it adds no context to kind of, you know, if you grew up in poverty, for example, you might not have a lot on there because you didn't have access to educational opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's really limiting. And actually, a lot of people can be upskilled in a job from skill sets they naturally have, or skill sets that they acquired because of their unique lived experience as a disabled person. So yeah, and then obviously they put quite an emphasis on kind of interviews if it's not an accessibility barrier, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how it'd look, and yeah, I am kind of behind it. When I joined, I was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure about that because CVs have been around for so long, but I have been converted by Jane, who explains it much better than I can. It's actually in her books that she talks about. I'm not explaining it very well.
That's okay. I can completely see where the place where it is, because you are seeing it with more of the creative industries. Because I know Purple Go sister agency, when they've done recruiting before, they've been like, oh, send us a video rather than send us the CV. So like, people are buying into like different ways of producing like CV-esque stuff. Yeah. But I think, like you say, there's a lot more of like buying into the person and understanding the person, because then you get the idea of the skill set. Because like you said, I'm the same. Like, Jesus, I can plan anything between an inch of its life. Like, this is where people think I'm OCD, because I'm like, no, I need to know this, and this before I even create the blueprint for the rest of it.
True.
I mean, and also that's my other thing is I hate being late. One of my big things comes in, I hate being late. And the reason for that, I actually boiled it down. It's, you know, when you were late for class, and for someone in a wheelchair, or someone that you need people to move out your way, or you need help, it's a big kerfuffle, and it just feels really awkward.
Okay.
So I was always the first one in the class looking like the right dweeb sitting in the corner ready.
No, I was the same. I've always wanted to be early. But yeah, it's so true. There's so many natural skill sets that people have, and it's very unique to the person. It's not painting all disabled people with the same brush. It's very unique to how you've experienced life. But yeah, it is an interesting approach to job recruitment.
Last thing I'll ask on the job recruitment space is that, like, as someone that works in the space, I know you're I'm pulling on straws a little bit because I know you're in the marketing space, but obviously being in that space, is there anything that you sit there thinking we need to change this or we need to do more of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to go for something that's quite topical right now that is, not only hurtful as a disabled person, but also as someone that's in the workplace, is just kind of the comms and engagement around Disability Pride Month. That might have been a bit of a red herring in this conversation, but and I think that not necessarily Disability Pride Month, but more towards visibility of the community.
Yeah.
I think more of that needs to be done across the board. So, companies investing in having roundtables and seeing how their product works within the community, or, employer groups that have, disabled employees, and they actually listen, not just it being like trotted out like a pony, at the fair every couple of months. So yeah, I think it goes back to what we were saying. I think more just needs to be done around listening. And that goes in the employment space and beyond.
Completely agree. And it, like you say, it's that whole thing of communication, and a large part of communication is listening and understanding, and it's opening those channels of dialogue. And that's why I am such a fanboy of EvenBrake, Purple Go, because they do open those channels that up until now have been quite closed. And there are other individuals that I'm probably not aware of that do similar stuff, but it's nice to see that it's becoming slowly front of mind is really nice to see.
Yeah. I mean, just look at the employers on EvenBrake, for example. That's been a massive journey to get that kind of engagement from some of the big industry giants. If anyone can take anything away from this episode, I'd like to think that positive change is happening. It's in nuggets everywhere. PG, marketing, EvenBrake, workforce. It is happening.
Actually, one thing I do want to ask you as a fellow disabled person, because I have my own views. What's your last question on the recruitment side of things? I promise. What's your opinion on the disability confidence badge?
I mean, I think it's difficult because I think by badging it or giving it like a shiny title means that you're stopping where you're at. And actually we know, even from being in the community ourselves, that things are constantly evolving and changing.
Yeah.
So I find the Pit Stop Award to be a bit like, it can be tokenistic, obviously. We obviously don't, it can't be applied across the board, but I think it puts a stop in the journey. Like, I feel like a company might be like, well, that's me done. I'm inclusive.
Yeah.
And actually their inclusivity is back 5 years ago, using the wrong terminology, not identifying hidden disabilities, for example.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think for me, it was just that, because from personal experience, I've had companies that have got that disability confidence badge and still had quite a negative experience of them. So I'm like, how much is it really worth? Because proof is in the pudding. I would rather an organisation doesn't have the disability confidence badge, but just goes, do you know what? Yeah. Even I love people or organisations that are like, do you know what? We've never thought about this before, but let's go on this thing. Let's figure this out together. Let's see how this all works.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's a space to be more vulnerable. Like, I think what we were saying earlier about, like, I think the best place is to just start and just start having the conversations. Like, I know as a disabled person that I would much rather an employer be abreast and ask, what are your accommodations? How can we support you? Than, around language and stuff. Like, if your intentions are right, and I'm so used to talking about my disability in the context of workspaces that I probably can list them out to you very easily.
as you say, I think this is where there's the discussion to be had, because I know the other side of the discussion where it says like, oh, but you shouldn't always have to explain your disability. But then I think particularly in the work context, it's really important because even from your experience that you've said to me and my experience, is like, that's how you make sure you get the correct support, because if you don't tell them, they're not going to know. And I know
also, I think painting it with the same brush is a bit, it's catch-22, because even people with the same disability might not experience it in the same way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is where I have a bit of a weird belief system, unpopular opinion in the disabled space, is I actually think there's a place for the social model and medical model together.
Okay, interesting.
Because my opinion is if you look at the medical model for the aspect of showcasing the areas of difficulties for certain situations. So if you take, for example, the neurodiverse community, yes, there are so many different layers of, like, so many different presentations, so many different disabilities that come under that umbrella. But for your average Joe that has no understanding of disability, the medical model can be a good place to start, because it gives them a framework to start working from within. So, like, it gives them an idea of what neurodiversity may look like, what area. Like, if we look at it from the employer's context, I look at it like, okay, so I've got Dana, she identifies as the neurodiverse community. Okay, so from the medical model framework, these are the areas that we're probably going to be looking at that she may need support. But I will ask her the question just to confirm, but I know sort of roughly what to start talking to the team about putting in place for Dana. So that's where I think I always think for an idiot guide, the medical model sometimes can work. Now, if you take it too literal, 100% is bullshit. But in terms of just giving someone, like, people like ballparks to work within to give them an idea of where to start looking. So that's where I think the medical model does have its place, in my opinion, because then you can then guide them over to the social model and be like, okay, now you know this, let me expose you to this.
It's actually really interesting you've brought up obviously the different kind of pentagrams or whatever, because I actually have, so in terms of like the social model of disability, it fits for a lot of my disabilities, but one thing for me that it doesn't fit is my autism. And it was actually a friend of mine that told me about the post-social model, that was telling me about how I can have all the accommodations in the world, and I do, genuinely do, both at Evenbreak and in my past role at Purple Goat, and I will still be disabled by my own brain. I will still be overstimulated without. I think sometimes the issue is, particularly with my autism, is employers are constantly trying to find the cause. Why are you overstimulated? What happened? Why, what did you do wrong? And the honest truth is sometimes because I am disabled, there is no rhyme or reason. And I've tried to stop putting so much pressure on myself to be like, well, what was the barrier? What was the catalyst for me needing to spend 3 days in bed off work? And I think in a lot of instances, the social model doesn't quite fit the experience. And I was thinking, chatting to a friend of mine who is deaf, and she was saying, I actually totally relate to that, because I will never not be deaf. There is no, and I'll never not be deaf. And I think it's quite interesting, and obviously very, very personal on how you experience disability, but it is something that I have battled with consistently, because I think sometimes the social model, whilst it's great and more progressive than the medical model, I think it can also have us kind of going in circles of trying to find the why and the barrier, when actually something like autism, my brain is the barrier. The way I experience the world, sometimes it just is. And there is nothing that anyone can do, employer or not, myself, and I've had to stop beating myself up, that can do it. Same with chronic pain flares. I can do everything right. I can spend the whole week on the sofa and literally not move and still have a flare up, because it's a medical condition that just has a mind of its own. So, I think it's an interesting conversation you brought up about the kind of the structures that we use within the community.
I mean, it's interesting, very anecdotal, but it's just something that's very front of mind for me from friends. Is the other thing of, I think we just put too much pressure on ourselves. We've always got to have a reason why. Like, for
why
example,
am I? Yeah.
if you're feeling shitty, like, you've got to dial down why, and you're like, I just feel like shit. Like, it is what it is, and like, I can't remember. There's a guy I think it's Simon Sinek. He's got this thing of like, not having to always fix the problem, like particularly like in terms of being in a bad mood or feeling terrible. Sometimes people don't want you to fix it; they just want you to sit in the mud with them and go through that with them. And I think that is something to be said. We're always looking for a reason. I think because we are so like we're very evidence based. We're very evidence based and very much like why. When we can just accept like, you're allowed to feel rough or you're allowed to have off days. Like, this whole concept, particularly like we've talked about the work thing of you're 110% every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's never going to happen. There are definitely going to be days where you've got the attention span of a goldfish. Yeah. So, and employers should understand that as well. So like, I think, there's, like I say, with the medical model, social model, and the what was it? Post-social model. I'd never heard of it before. I think,
it's really interesting. It's basically the progression, the next step.
Yeah.
Of,
I think as well, it's, as I say, for me, I think there is. I think the whole thing, there's different bits that work, different bits that don't work. But I think anecdotally, I think there is that we need to stop putting so much pressure on ourselves. I think that is just a whole thing of stop putting pressure on ourselves and stop putting pressure on others, and it comes back to the point I made earlier of like, allow people to learn, but then also allow people to just to do what they do. If they're feeling rubbish, they're feeling rubbish. If they've got the attention span of a goldfish, they've got the attention span of a goldfish. Like,
I think that also comes from kind of not only capitalism, but also kind of like the toxic productivity culture we've got going on just in society in general. Like, and then obviously it feeds into like being ableism when it comes. And one of the things I like to say is that I'm often ableistic. Is that the word? I often am ableist to myself. Like, 100%. I'll be like,
me too.
Do it. And it's like, if that was someone else, I'd be like, no, like, stay in bed. You need to, like, you rest. Or like, it is very interesting. And I think the just is movement needs to pick up that sometimes there is no fix. I've actually seen a lot of commentary on couples relationships around that. How a lot of the time, like, I follow a couple of like couple psychologists because I find it quite fascinating, the dynamics. And they were saying that like women, like, or people that identify as a woman, as female, tend to want from their partner, just want them, oh, I'm sorry. Whereas what actually causes a lot of arguments is the partner being like, but why? It's probably because you didn't drink enough water. Or like if someone says, I've got a really bad headache, and someone goes, did you drink water? And that actually causes more arguments rather than, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry you feel like that. Yeah, and that being a full sentence.
But it's that like I just said, it's that whole sit in the mud analogy of always looking for and I say this and I'm guilty of it. Gina will tell you, fuck me, the amount of times I go to Gina, like you say, I've got a headache, have you taken anything?
No.
I'm like
so true. It's so true. It's very, very interesting, especially when in the context of disability.
100%. And I want to circle back to something because it's something I did want to ask you before we sort of finish up, and it's circling back to a bit more of the social media and content creation space. So you've been running a little bit of a social experiment in terms of running. Apparently, this is from I didn't know about this till the other day. Gina mentioned it. That you're running a bit of an experiment in terms of running social TikTok account for both targeting or more showcasing your disabilities and one not, and seeing the difference of the two. How has that been? I didn't realise this till the other day. I'll be honest, I hold my hands up. But how has that been?
You know what? It's so eye-opening, and I find it because the content style, the execution is the same. So it's the skit-based content. I originally created the page, like the first post, was because I actually felt like I was being pigeonholed with my other content. Like I couldn't just be me without talking about my disability. And, that can sometimes be a little bit tiring, particularly as a creative person where you just want to make content. So I set this one page, did this one thing, and the followers, I mean, I grew very quickly on Dyslexic Dana. Like I had 10K within 2 weeks. Like it was quite big. But this one, I had 10K within a day.
Wow.
And because I've always been really fascinated looking at other creators that aren't disabled. So I have a couple of friends that are big creators, like we're talking millions on Instagram, on TikTok, sorry. And the way that they've grown, even though they started at the same time to me, is totally different. But we make the same quality of content. And I've always been really intrigued by it. So that's why I set up the kind of second page and started doing the kind of experiment. And I've just found it fascinating because it's almost seeing how the other half lives, because also the comment section is just nice.
Yeah.
Like there's no kind of like you know, like horribleness.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's just like, haha, this is really funny, this chip. It's really quite interesting. And I don't know if somebody said like, oh, it's because people don't relate as much to their disability content. But I was like, but I like stuff that I don't necessarily relate to, but find like creatively entertaining or interesting. So yeah, it has been quite interesting because it took me a year to build up my Dyslexic Dana page to 100K, and that was like a big moment for me. I was like, oh wow, like this is cool. This other page, I was at 100K and it didn't feel like, well, I think it was like 96 or something. I didn't feel like big of an achievement because it happened within a month.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting you say this, because it's actually why I've started, although I still want to cover it because it's still very important to me. It's why we've started moving away from the disability space in terms of the interviews we carry out on here, because I was worried that, like, as you say, like as a creative person, I didn't want to just be the guy that speaks to other people in the disabled community. I wanted to speak to all different types of people. And I always think there is a bridge between the two of like more showcasing to the wider community that there's little nuances that I can bring to be like, no, this relates to disability in this way. This relates to disability in this way. And you might not think about this, but if you thought about it from this perspective. Yeah. So that was why I started changing it. And it is so true. I think it was something that concerned me quite. It was one of the realizations you go, oh, and then I couldn't leave it alone. I was like, I don't like that. I need to fix that. So
I hate the fact that the only way to fund my content is to speak negatively about how I experience disability. I will say that.
Yeah, that is exactly how I felt. It's exactly how I felt. I mean, I try and steer away from the negative content because it's just not me. Like Dana knows me. I'm perpetually sarcastic and fairly happy-go-lucky. And it wasn't me, and I always felt like I always had to be, this has gone wrong, rah. And also, half the time, I'll be honest, as a creator, half the time, if something's going wrong, I don't want to film it.
Well, that's why I make skits, because I wouldn't go back. But yeah, I mean, I do find, I've tried to start shifting my content recently, and I made a conscious effort, for example, with the Taylor Swift content, to start shifting to making content that reflected me. Because obviously they are my experiences, but they're very polished and put together after the fact. I wanted to start showing more facets of my life and kind of showing that I'm not just disabled. Like I'm renovating my first home at the moment, which obviously adds some interesting nuances being disabled. So, I wanted to start doing a series about that, but then the niggle in the back of my head is, well, the audiences expect a certain type of content from you. And then the whole thing that comes back to is disabled creators have to fund themselves, because a lot of it, it's how you get paid. So if you make content or shift content and it does really badly, the analytics directly affects how you're paid. Yep. So it's like a catch-22, which is why I made the second page, because I just wanted somewhere where I didn't overthink it. I just did. I made the theatrical skits a lot, but, kind of silly secretary ones, because I absolutely love school POVs. I think they're hilarious, and everyone relates to them.
Yeah.
But, like, I could only ever make POVs on dyslexic Dana that was like some horrible teacher was horrible to me when I was 7.
Yeah.
Versus like just the caricatures of high school and the experience of the 2000s and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but it was quite eye-opening to see the difference. I thought, wow, this is how the other side lives.
Yeah. I always do wonder, like, you see these massive creators and you sit there thinking, fuck me, like, the numbers are crazy.
Yeah. I often think that about very big influencers that are obviously in the space and people that came up at a similar time to me, seeing how they've expanded their content. Or my favourite thing is knowing, because I know them on a personal level, that a creator is disabled or identifies as neurodivergent, but they don't make any content about it. So they almost are like a Hannah Montana, where they're engaging with my content and other disability creators, but their own content is for the masses rather than for the niche, or so yeah, it is quite interesting. It doesn't make you feel overly great about yourself as a disabled person. I don't recommend doing it.
No, but it is super interesting, and I think I could sit here for hours chatting about it, because it's something that I've recently got. I had a bit of an epiphany, and because of the type of person I am, if I have an epiphany, I need to dig and find out as much as I can in a very short space of time. But it is, it's super interesting, and it's super interesting as well that it grew so much quicker. Yeah.
So much quicker. And I've actually found as well with my Dyslexic Dana page, I seem to have been stuck, despite getting millions and millions of views still. Like, I seem to have been stuck at 100 or just under 150k for a very long time. And I saw another creator, I think it was Ella Willis, do this when they had a similar situation like a couple of years ago, where they were saying like they'd been stuck at a certain number for like a really long time despite having really good views. And it's like really weird why that happens.
Don't set me off on the algorithm. I'm a much smaller creator in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, don't set me off, because we will be here for hours.
Okay, I'll stop.
And lastly, I want to ask you the question that I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with? It doesn't have to be disability related.
Okay, so it's about Taylor Swift variants. So we all know she makes like a lot of variants, but my kind of thing that you just said that I now can't remember the format of the sequence is you don't have to buy it. The stuff she releases is for the people that are collectors like myself. You don't have to buy the variants if you don't want to. You don't need to be so pressed about it. Like, if you don't want to buy them, don't buy them. Leave them for people that are collectibles, because I think some people can be fans but not understand someone that is a collector like myself.
Completely get that. I'm not a collector myself for any. There's not a thing where I'm like, oh, collect this. But I can completely see it. It's like, if it's their passion, let them crack on. And if you don't agree with it, there's that whole thing of just let people do what they want to do.
You don't have to buy it. And I know some people will go back to kind of the overconsumption argument, which I do understand, and obviously we have to be mindful of. But I feel like realistically, the people that are buying the multiple variants are like myself, who are collectors. And that's why they're on for short periods of time and limited stock. So, yeah. That if you just want to listen to Spotify, that's fine. You're still a fan. You don't have to buy the different variants of the black dog.
Facts. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been awesome. We could sit here for hours. There are so many things we didn't even get into. I've really enjoyed the episode, and I think people are going to get a lot of value from it, particularly around the work that you're doing in the recruitment space with EvenBrake. There's a lot there. And thank you again for coming on. I will obviously link Dana all below for everything. You can find everything. I'll also link EvenBrake, Purple Go, and everyone we've mentioned, so that if you want to check them out, you can check them out below. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast.